So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel or Babel, which literally means gate of the gods. El means God, and B-A-B there means gate. And so they were trying to build what I like to call a stairway to heaven. They were trying to make a path into heaven without God's grace. It's basically works righteousness. Because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. So what you have to understand, and the biblical text doesn't tell me this, I'm depending on, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen there, a book by Alexander Hislop, which is considered a classic, called The Two Babylons. And Hislop did a study of Babylonian tradition. He got his hands on everything that he could find in extra-biblical material that dealt with Babylon, and he writes about it in this book, what was happening at the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was coming together under a man named Nimrod, who is mentioned in the biblical text. He's mentioned in Genesis 10 and verses 8 through 10. In fact, Nimrod's very name means revolt. So he is the first prefigurement, if you will, of the coming Antichrist. And Hislop says that Nimrod was married to a woman named Semiramis. And essentially what happened is that the two of them had a child named Tammuz. Tammuz was killed by a wild animal. But then Tammuz was miraculously resurrected to life. You know, very similar to the way Satan in Revelation 13 is going to bring the Antichrist back to life in the tribulation period. So what happened is everybody started to worship this mother and the mother and the child. So they worshipped Semiramis and they worshipped Tammuz. And that was the whole religious system that was in place in Genesis 11. So God did not like this one world project. You know, we talk a lot about one world government and people wanting one world government. This is man's first attempt at one world government. And they were basically trying to build what we would call a new world order, which is a system of politics, economics, and religion that excludes God, that controls every facet of a person. And this system was political, the system was economic, and the system was also religious. And it was religious in the sense that people were worshiping, according to Hislop, the mother and the child. And God understands something about human nature. He understands that power corrupts, and absolute power, what? Corrupts absolutely. So God did not like this project, so he went in and performed a miracle so that people couldn't understand each other. So from one language, you now have multiple languages. So from there, the human race spread abroad. So people that spoke one language went one direction. People that spoke a different language went a different direction. People that spoke even another language went a different direction. And what did each culture take with them? A piece of the religious system of the Tower of Babel. See that? So the point is, every country on planet Earth has been corrupted by this system. It's just, and Hislop says you can look at all kinds of cultures and you can find remnants of this mother-child worship system. It's just the names get changed from culture to culture. So in Assyria, the mother is called Ishtar. By the way, what word do we get from Ishtar? Easter. So all this stuff about bunnies and eggs and things like that, you all realize that's not in the Bible. That's Babylonian paganism that we've incorporated into our holiday. The mother is called Ishtar, the child is called Tammuz. In Phoenicia, the mother was called Astarte, the child was called Baal. In Egypt, the mother was called Isis. The child is called Osiris or Horus. In Greece, the mother is called Aphrodite. The child is called Eros. In Rome, the mother is called Venus. The child is called Cupid. So I've already wrecked Easter. I might as well wreck Valentine's Day. This thing where you shoot an arrow into somebody and they madly fall in love with you, Cupid and all these things, that's Babylonianism. I still think you should celebrate Valentine's Day too. Unless you want to go to divorce court or something, don't tell your spouse your church said we're not going to celebrate Valentine's Day anymore. In Asia, the mother is called Cybele. The child is called Odysseus. In India, the mother is called Isi. The child is called Aswara. Now, Alexander Hislop is no friend of Roman Catholicism. If you mention Alexander Hislop around Roman Catholics, they will, and if they're well read, they'll react angrily against the name Alexander Hislop, because Hislop's point is the Mary and Jesus of Roman Catholicism is not the Mary and Jesus of the Bible. We accept that as true because we had a Protestant Reformation. So in the Roman Catholic system, Mary is actually like a co-redemptress. And she is actually someone that you pray to. And Mary, of course, they believe remained a virgin her whole life. They call that the immaculate or the perpetual virginity of Mary, which is sort of hard to argue because Jesus had a lot of half-brothers, didn't he? And Jesus, of course, in Roman Catholicism is just, it's a works-based system. So Hislop said this mother-child cult went right into Roman Catholicism and adopted the biblical names Mary and Jesus. And this is why God raised up Israel, because Israel was the only nation started independent of this mother-child cult. This is why when the mother-child cult, later on in Israel's history, comes into the borders of Israel, God is irate at this. For example, notice a few verses, Jeremiah chapter 7, and verse 18. This is much later on after Israel's already been in existence. It says, "The children gather wood and the fires kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven." Now, who's the Queen of Heaven? The Queen of Heaven is Semiramis. And I've had, in my classes at CBS, I've had Roman Catholic students who have told me, you know what, this is exactly what Roman Catholics call the Virgin Mary today. They actually call her the Queen of Heaven. Notice Jeremiah 44 and verse 17. It says, "Rather, we will certainly carry out every word that has proceeded from our mouths by burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven." There it is again. And one more, notice about one or two books to the right, Ezekiel 8, verses 14 and 15. See, and this is the reason Israel went off into the deportation. God was so angry at his people because he started them independent of the mother-child cult, and lo and behold, they had become just like the very system that he started independent of the mother-child cult. Israel had lost sight of her purpose. That's why God is so angry with the nation of Israel when she says, we want a king so we can be like what? 1 Samuel 8. All the other nations. Well, why do you want to be like all the other nations? You were started for the purpose of being different than the other nations. Notice, if you will, Ezekiel 8, 14 and 15. It says, "Then he brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, women were sitting there weeping for" who? Tammuz. Now that's the child in the Nimrod system. And then verse 15, he said to me, "Do you see this, Son of Man? Yet you will see greater abominations than these." So what you have to understand about Genesis 11 is the mother-child cult was exported into every single culture. And this is why the Lord raised up the nation of Israel. You see, God can't use Assyria. She's been corrupted by the mother-child cult. He can't use Egypt, Phoenicia, any other nation on here, because they've all been corrupted by the mother-child cult. So God has to create a brand new nation. And through this brand new nation, he's going to fulfill his kingdom promises that begin as early as Genesis 3, verse 15. That's why early Genesis is carefully tracing the genealogy, the lineage of Genesis 3:15, right from Adam to Abram. So Israel has a very special place in the outworking of God's purposes because she is the only nation started independently of the mother-child cult, because God's starting of the nation of Israel was subsequent or after every other culture had been infected with the virus of the mother-child cult. That's why Genesis 11 is necessary background to understand what God is doing with Abram in Genesis 12.